Hello and welcome to the Tech Download, a new CNBC original podcast where we unpack the tech stories that matter most.
Each season, we dive into one big theme and what it means for your money with insights from the industry's most influential voices.
I've always thought that in the end, it would be the most important technology we'll ever invent. And it's sort of the natural progression, really, of the computer age.
This season, we're looking at Google DeepMind, the powerhouse driving the tech giant's AI push.
We've been given rare access to key figures at the company, including our guest for this episode, DeepMind co-founder and CEO Demis Hassabis.
I think that it's going to be like the Industrial Revolution, but maybe 10 times bigger, 10 times faster. So it's an incredible amount of transformation, but also disruption that's going to happen.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tech Download. Allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm Arjun Karpal, a senior technology correspondent at CNBC based in London. And I've got a very special new co-host with me.
Hey there, Arjun. Yeah, Steve Kovac here. I cover tech over here in New York. I mostly focus on Apple and Microsoft, but look, I've been covering the tech industry for over 15 years now. I kind of have a good grasp on everything, and I'm so excited to be here with you, Arjun, because I've just admired your work from across the ocean for so long, and now we actually get to kind of collaborate and do this thing together. I think it's going to be a good time.
It's going to be so fun, Steve. So between us, we think we've got nearly 3 decades of experience covering tech. And the crazy thing is we've got so much to learn. And I think over the course of us doing this podcast, we're going to learn so much, speak to so many interesting people. And I'm so excited that this first series, we're kicking off with an insight into Google DeepMind, one of the world's leading AI labs as well. And just for our listeners and our viewers, a quick intro, I guess, to Google DeepMind. It was a company founded in 2010 here in London, where I sit as well. Very small company founded by 3 people, Demis Hassabis, Shane Legg, and Mustafa Suleyman, who's at Microsoft now, right?
Yeah, and in fact, I interviewed him, nearly a year ago now, Mustafa Suleyman. He's basically doing what Demis is doing over at Google. And it's just kind of interesting to see how Google was like this incubator, so to speak, for all of this top AI talent around the world. Demis obviously stuck around. He's running DeepMind over there. What I also think is really interesting, though, is just this AI moment, Arjun, we've been living through for the last 3 years, and how 3 years ago, ChatGPT comes on the scene and Google was kind of seen as under threat. They went through this code red. They had to go through a bunch of reorganizations internally. Eventually, Demis came out on top as the leader of AI. And guess what? 2025 was a really interesting year for AI over at Google. They kind of caught up and in some ways even surpassed what ChatGPT was already doing. And this is really interesting because the fundamental technology for all these large language models we've been talking about for so many years started at Google. And the perception was Google let ChatGPT kind of take that technology and run away with it. But now, in my view, at least, Gemini is pretty much on par, if not better, than ChatGPT.
And Google DeepMind is integral for this. I mentioned it was founded in 2010. Google actually acquired DeepMind in 2014. I was very new into my career as a tech reporter as well. Google paid around £400 million for DeepMind at the time in 2014, about $540 million. It's a stake this day that could be worth tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars, according to some estimates today. And DeepMind really is very much responsible for Google's AI. We talk about Gemini, the chatbot, the AI that Google's released to consumers. This is powered so much by the technology coming out of DeepMind. But even before all of this, DeepMind was having some big breakthroughs. There was a big moment a few years ago when they released a system called AlphaGo. This was the first computer program that was able to defeat a world champion in a game called Go. This is a very complex game, and it was seen at the time as one of the grand challenges of AI because it was such a complex game with so many different combinations available. The other big breakthrough, of course, was something called AlphaFold. This was another AI system developed at DeepMind that could accurately predict 3D models of protein structures. And the idea is here is if you could do that, this may lead to some medical breakthroughs. So this advancement of science has been pretty core to what DeepMind's been up to. And clearly, it was a significant bet from Google more than 10 years ago because it's helped turn Google into an AI world leader today.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And what really struck me about DeepMind, having watched them for so many years, is how rooted in science they were. They weren't necessarily trying to build consumer products like they do now. They were really trying to solve fundamental problems in science and really usher in this era of AI-powered drug discovery, of other big complex problems like climate change. I know Demis talks about that a lot, and he's going to talk about that in your conversation as well, Arjun.
Absolutely, Steve. Look, it's a great scene setter for DeepMind, so let's get into the conversation with its CEO, Demis Hassabis. Demis, thanks for joining me on the Tech Download. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Demis, we're going to try to get through a lot in our time here, but I want to start first with the technology itself. And we've been talking about AI, and we've been talking about the capabilities and how they've been continuously improving as well. Now, in the tech world, I know there's a lot of conversations about how good can these models get? How good can these systems get? And there's a lot of debate around this idea of scaling laws. For our listeners, it's this idea of more compute, more data, bigger models eventually will lead to bigger systems as well. You said we need to push scaling laws to the maximum. Mm-hmm. There's questions over now, are we hitting any kind of walls in terms of progress of those scaling laws, in terms of the ability for these models to get better? And just from what you've been developing here at DeepMind, what are you seeing?
Well, look, I think scaling laws are going very well. So we're definitely seeing increased capabilities by putting in more compute, more data, and making these models generally larger. So that trend's continuing, mainly not as fast as it was a couple of years ago. So there's some talk of diminishing returns, but there's a big difference between sort of no returns and exponential. And I think we're somewhere in the middle where there's very good returns, and that's worth doing. On top of that, in terms of like getting all the way to AGI, artificial general intelligence, it may be that there's one or two big innovations still needed as well, and maybe missing, in addition to the scaling up of kind of the existing ideas.
We'll get on to AGI very shortly, but what are missing in your view?
Well, if you look at, we've all, played around with different chatbots, and you can see that, they can do very impressive things in some dimensions, but they're kind of like jagged intelligences, I like calling them, in the sense of like they're very good at certain things, but there are other things that they don't do, they're not capable of at all. And if you pose a question in a certain way, you find that they're flawed, and they can't do some relatively simple things. And so for a true general intelligence, you shouldn't see that inconsistency. It should be consistent across the board. And also there are things like it can't continually learn, it can't learn new things online, it can't truly create original things. So there's quite a few capabilities that you would like to see and you would need for general intelligence that are missing from today's systems.
That's really interesting. So what would be the sort of unlock to get to those intelligent systems? I just want to quickly discuss the conversation I had with Thomas Wolfe, who's the co-founder over at Hugging Face. And
yes.
He was talking to me a few months back about his view on LLMs, in particular large language models, and just saying they're really great, and you use these chatbots, and the chatbot will say, hey, great question, great idea, and here's all the information you need to know. But what's missing is the ability for these systems to come up with new and novel ideas, perhaps, and particularly I know you're so interested in science and what AI could do to unlock new drugs or discover new diseases, etc. That actually maybe the LLM's limitations are there, that you can't come up with these Nobel Prize winning ideas, these novel ideas.
Yeah.
So perhaps there needs to be some sort of new architecture. What's your thinking on that at the moment?
Yeah, well, look, my passion for and my whole reason I've spent my whole career on AI is I think eventually it will be the ultimate tool for science. And of course, we've shown that with things like AlphaFold and all of the science work we've been doing over the last decade. But there's still a long way to go in terms of can an AI actually come up with a new hypothesis itself, not just solve a conjecture that is already out there, which would be already useful and impressive, but can it actually come up with a new conjecture, a new idea about how the world might work? And so far, these systems can't do that. They don't really have the capability to do that. So there seems to be something missing. I think some of the capabilities that are required are kind of long-term planning, better reasoning, maybe also the idea of a world model, this idea of the system actually understanding better the physics of the world so that it can run simulations, kind of in its mind to test its own hypotheses. These are things that, the best scientists do, human scientists do. And so far, our AI systems, are not able to do that.
Can you just help us understand a bit more of this idea of world models? Because it may be a term people are hearing for the first time. How I guess they differ from LLMs, large language
so
models.
LLMs and the models we use at the moment are, mostly around text. Of course, things like Gemini, our foundation model, can also cope with images and video and audio, so different modalities. But it's still actually understanding the physics of the world, the causality of the world, how one thing affects another thing. Can you plan a long time into the future? These are all related concepts. And if you really want to understand how the world works, so that maybe you can invent something new in the world or explain something about the world that was not known before, which is basically what scientific theory does, then you have to have this accurate model of how the world works. Starting with intuitive physics and how the physics of the world works, but all the way up to biology, and economics.
Yeah. And do you envisage a world, if we get to this idea of artificial general intelligence, this sort of human level of intelligence, that there will be a combination of LLMs and world models working together, or will sort of world models supersede, in some sense, LLMs?
No, I think there'll be some convergence of these technologies. That's at least my betting is there'll be these LLMs or foundation models, like Gemini under the hood. That will be a key component. I think I think there's almost no doubt about that in my mind, which is why we must try and scale those systems as big and as powerful as we can. But the question is it the only component that's needed for an AGI? And that's where I suspect other types of technologies and other types of capabilities will be needed. And I think these world model capabilities, and we're working on our versions called Genie, and we have video models like VO, state-of-the-art video models that you can generate videos from text. And you can think of video models and interactive models like Genie as kind of early embryonic world models, where if you can generate something that's realistic about the world, then in a sense your model understands that about the world. Otherwise, how could it have generated it?
Demis, you mentioned this AGI, artificial general intelligence. I know there's various definitions of it floating around. You've previously said you believe that reaching AGI could be somewhere in the realm of 5 to 10 years away. Is this still your view, given, I guess, some of the profound developments we've seen in 2025?
Yes, I think we're right on track from that. Actually, when we started DeepMind back in 2010, we thought this would be a 20-year kind of mission to build AGI, a system that's capable of exhibiting all the cognitive capabilities we have, including, things like true innovation and creativity, and planning and reasoning and things like that. And I think we're about 5 to 10 years away from that. But that's, pretty incredible if you think about how transformative a technology this is.
You mentioned there might need to be some more technology breakthroughs. We're seeing things like the models advancing. We're seeing the semiconductors advancing rapidly as well. Are there any currently bottlenecks and things you need to figure out? I know energy is something that's been brought up so much, saying, well, look, we can keep advancing chips, we can keep advancing models, but at some point, we're just not going to have enough energy to run these data centers, to run these AI models. Well, look, there's lots of physical constraints. So, of course, there's, no one ever has enough chips. And, we're lucky that we have, our own TPU range in addition to GPUs. And but there just aren't enough compute chips in the world, really, for the demand. And, of course, in the end, that comes down to energy as well. There's this idea of energy effectively is synonymous with intelligence as we get into the era towards AGI. Now, the interesting thing is, I think that AI itself will help here in the sense of getting more efficiencies out of existing infrastructure, but helping with things like material design, better solar materials. But it could also help with new breakthrough technologies like fusion. We have a collaboration with Commonwealth Fusion in the US to help contain plasma and fusion reactors. And one of my pet projects is, can we come up with a room temperature superconductor material using AI? So I think there are multiple breakthroughs that AI could come up with and help us come up with that would help with the energy situation. In fact, indeed, I think that's one of the most promising use cases of AI. And then the other thing is, as these systems are getting better, they're also getting 10x more efficient per year. So if you look at our range of models, we have our kind of lighthouse model, our pro versions of Gemini, but then we have our flash versions, which are way more efficient and the sort of workhorse models that are used for everything. And they use techniques like distillation, where you have a big model
that teaches a smaller model, and the smaller model is really, really efficient. And I think there are more and more innovations and techniques like that will keep bringing the efficiency curve down, and so you get much better performance per watt.
We hear a lot about sort of AGI, and I think there's a lot of people wondering, technology sounds amazing, sounds great. There's also a lot of fear, right, around the proliferation of this technology and the impact it's going to have on people every day and their lives. I guess for you, what are some of the things we need to consider from that perspective in terms of the impact on society, whether it's around jobs, whether it's around kind of what we're going to do with our time if we reach this goal, versus, I guess, the benefits that you believe this technology is going to bring for humanity?
Well, of course, I believe that overall AI is going to be one of the most beneficial technologies humanity's ever invented. That's why I spent my whole career working on it. But it's only, it's not a given. It's a dual purpose technology. I dream about using AI for things like curing diseases. We have a spin out called Isomorphic that builds on AlphaFold work, on protein folding work that we did a few years ago to accelerate drug discovery and try and solve all disease. I think that's now, within reach, that type of thing in the next decade or two. We've discussed energy. There's many benefits. I think incredible benefits AI is going to bring. But there are also risks. Obviously, there's kind of economic disruption. And I think it's going to be like the Industrial Revolution, but maybe 10 times bigger, 10 times faster. So, it's an incredible amount of transformation, but also disruption that's going to happen. And, we need some new economic models probably for that. And then in terms of the worries about the usage of AI, I have two, which I think are worth worrying about. One is bad actors repurposing these general purpose technologies, AI technologies, for harmful ends. And then the second one is AI itself, as we get towards AGI and agent-based systems. So these are systems that are able to do things more autonomously than today's systems. They can, what are the guardrails around that? How do we make sure we can keep them doing the things that we want them to do and not veer off into something that we didn't expect? And so those are the two kind of risks that are kind of that I foresee.
Do you feel that you're developing systems that you can be in control of?
I think we're very confident about that. We've had and thought about responsibility and safety and security of these systems from the very beginning. We started DeepMind back in 2010. Almost no one was working on AI back then, but we planned for success, and we knew success would mean these extremely powerful systems. So we also understood the other side of the coin of that. So from the very beginning, we've tried to be very thoughtful, use the scientific method and scientific approach to try and understand as much about our systems we're building before we deploy them. Of course, that doesn't mean we won't make any mistakes. It's such a incredible and fast moving technology. But I think with something like AI, we need to be, I call myself a kind of cautious optimist. I'm very big believer in human ingenuity. I think given enough time and care, we'll get this right as scientists and as a society. But it's not a given, and so we shouldn't be sort of rushing into this. And we need to go into it with our eyes open.
Because I guess the reason I asked it, because I know you've spoken to people like Joshua Bengio and Max Tegmark, and these are people I've also spoken to, and they're of this cohort that believes, do we need to be rushing so quickly into a world of AGI and agentic systems? Maybe we need more tool-based AI to solve specific things rather than these all-purpose or general-purpose kind of systems. And I know they've called for perhaps a slowdown to the development of these AGI systems. In your view, do you think you should be slowing down?
Well, I've had lots of, I know them very well, Joshua and Max. We've had many discussions and many others. And actually, I have some sympathy for that view that, building a tool-based AI is, thinking of AI as a tool or the ultimate tool for, say, science is the right way to build AI in the initial stages. And certainly that's the way we're viewing it and the kinds of things we apply AI to, like AlphaFold. But the thing is, it's a very complex geopolitical and corporate system that we're in, and it isn't just about, there are many companies trying to build this. There are also many nations trying to build it, and there's a sort of race dynamic which ideally wouldn't be there. So in an ideal case, this would be a scientific endeavor, and it would be very carefully, each step would be carefully considered. But unfortunately, the real world isn't like that, and we have to kind of be pragmatic about where we are. So So what we're trying to do is be good role models for, yes, being on the frontier, pushing that, the benefits of that as quickly as we can and as broadly as we can, but also try and be as responsible as possible with that along the way and thoughtful as possible. And I think we've got that balance pretty good right now, and hopefully that's a bit of a role model to the rest of the field and the industry too.
Yeah, I want to address some of those dynamics as well, but just first, I guess, just from a personal point of view, have you ever, you said you sort of started this mission of DeepMind, yeah. you believe in the technology, but has there ever been any moments in your career when you've gone like, should we be doing this?
Look, when you look at how powerful the technology is, I really think there are so many challenges confronting society today, not to do with AI, climate, poverty, the access to water. There's just so many issues, health, aging population, disease. So like, energy we talked about earlier. So if there wasn't a technology transformative as AI coming down the road, I'd be really worried about society's ability to deal with these challenges. So interestingly, AI itself is one of those challenges, maybe one of the greatest ones, but it's also one which can help us cope with and resolve and solve some of these other big grand challenges. So it's a very interesting one, right? It's sort of double-edged. And I've always believed in that. I've always thought that in the end, it would be the most important technology we'll ever invent. And I think it's sort of the natural progression, really, of the computer age.
Demis, you just a quick aside. You started life in gaming, which is amazing. Yep. Co-developing Theme Park.
Yes.
Fantastic game as well. Do you still play games?
Yes, I love games. It's my main and only hobby, really. These days, like League of Legends with my two boys and my brother, and we have a little team. We've done it since lockdown. But yeah, I love games in all its forms, from football to video games.
In such a high-impact, stressful role as you have, potentially, is that your unwind?
It is. It is. I would say so. And it's also, it's a kind of in the past as well, it's been a great creative endeavor for me, and it's how I learned programming and other things was through making games.
I have nowhere near as stressful a job as you, but that's my unwind too.
Yes, for sure.
Get home, turn the console on.
Exactly.
Just in that small segment alone, Steve, there's so much to unpack, and I want to focus on two kind of big buzzwords right now. The first is artificial general intelligence, or AGI, this idea, and I know there's so many different definitions of it, but broadly speaking, this idea of AI that is as smart or smarter than humans. And I think that so many of these big AI labs, including OpenAI, including DeepMind, are pushing and hoping to get to this stage of AGI. And so far, they've approached this with a technique called large language models, these AI models that are trained on huge amounts of data, but mainly text. But there's this other buzzword, right? World models, this idea of these AI models that understand the physical world. And this buzzword is really growing in popularity, right?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a big theme of AI going into the rest of 2026 and even into next year, because the idea here is that LLMs, sure, we got the language part down. It can mimic the way humans talk and speak and write and things like that. But when it comes to the physical world, we talk so much about robotics and AI and physical AI. Well, they need to understand how the physical world works, how water flows, how air moves, and things of that nature. And what really struck out to me when you brought this up to Demis, he said, yeah, we do need to start exploring that more. And in fact, he sees a world in which the LLM and those world models start to converge. I think that was the word he used, converge into something more unique and more powerful and capable. This is also a debate that's been playing out among AI leaders, like on social media. You could fire up X or your favorite social media site. And what really struck out to me is Jan LeCun. He was the head of AI for many years over at Meta. He recently left to start his own thing because he kind of got superseded by Alexander Wang and that whole big talent wars that happened over last summer. He had a really interesting interview in the Financial Times. He doesn't think LLMs are what's going to get us to AGI. To your point, that's what everyone's chasing, the superintelligence, AGI, whatever you want to call it. His thing is LLMs can only get you part of the way. You need world models and all sorts of other things. And he kind of harshly criticized Meta for not thinking beyond the LLM. And that seems to be part of the reason why he left to do his own thing. And it's really interesting to see one of Meta's big competitors, Gemini, just talk openly about it and say, Demis saying, yeah, we need to do this. We need to start thinking about this. It enables so many things from robotics, autonomous driving, and just a better understanding for these AI models and intelligent systems that we're chatting with to get you that right answer.
Steve, do you ever use a chat bot and you put something in and it will say, hey, Steve, great question. That's a really clever thought.
All the time. It's the sycophancy of all these chatbots, right? Where they're like, oh, you're so smart and great at asking me these questions. Yeah, all the time.
Exactly, because the reason I bring that up is partly to this point, this growing criticism of LLMs is that actually, yes, they're great and they'll give you the information, but actually when it comes to LLMs as a foundation for being able to create new ideas, novel ideas, there's limitations there. And I think that's partly what Demis was speaking to and why this idea of world models is really growing in popularity. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, as you mentioned, into this next phase of AI where it's key for things like robotics, driverless cars, and many other use cases too.
Yeah, and you'll notice as we continue this podcast, I'm incredibly cynical about the robotics angle of this AI moment we're living in. So many of the robots we're seeing, they're literally puppets. They're teleoperated. The best example, of course, is the Tesla Optimus robot, which started out as a man in a bodysuit dancing around. Now it's a real robot, but it's teleoperated. There are literally people in a control room controlling it over the internet and even using their voice to talk to you and things like that. So the robotics people I talked to, we had one in the office just a couple weeks ago, and they said the hardest part isn't building the actual robot, it's training it. And that's where these world models are going to come in so they can actually operate autonomously like we've been promised.
Demis, you mentioned some of the dynamics at play, right? And competition. Commercially, of course, is one of those. We've got OpenAI, we've got Anthropic, we've got all these different AI labs out there. It's intense. And Gemini 3 has had such good reception so far. But there was a point people were doubting Google as a whole and its ability to compete. And I'd say a point, it was at some point in 2025, and it wasn't that long ago. And then, Gemini 3 really came out and impressed a lot of people as well. But it's a space that's ever changing.
Yes.
So how would you assess right now the competitive environment? How do you feel it?
Yeah, well, look, it's a ferocious competitive environment at the moment. I mean, many people who are telling me, being in tech for 20, 30 years say it's the most intense environment they've ever seen, perhaps, ever in the technology industry. And all the, I guess, most capable players, whether it's individual tech titans or big tech companies or the best startups, they're all involved in this space now, because I think everyone has understood what we've known for 20 plus years now, that this is really the most important technology. So that's sort of to be expected, but it's tough, but it's also exciting. And, going back to games, I've started playing chess when I was very young for the England junior chess team. So I've kind of been brought up in competition. So, I love competition, fortunately. In fact, many ways I live for competition. So a big part of me sort of likes to lean into this. But on the other hand, the only thing I would say is at the back of my mind, I know there's something much more important than individual competition between companies or even countries, which is overall stewarding AGI well for the world, for the whole, for all of humanity. And I think that's incumbent of all of us who are leaders of the AI labs and can have an influence over this, is to have that the sort of in the front of their minds in amongst this sort of ferocious capitalist competition that we're in as well. So both are true at the same time.
I mentioned kind of the moment people were questioning what Google was going to do with AI earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Did you do anything different?
Yeah, I think, look, I feel like, if we go back over the last decade, actually, Google Brain, specifically the research division in Google, and DeepMind, as it was sort of fairly independent, we kind of invented about 90% of the technologies that everybody's using today. Whether it's transformers, of course, most famously, the architecture behind all the LLMs, or AlphaGo, sort of introduced reinforcement learning at scale on a really hard problem. So we've invented all this technology, but then maybe we were, in hindsight, we were a little bit slow to commercialize it and scale it. And, that's what OpenAI and others did very well. And then the last 2-3 years, I think we've had to come back to almost our startup or entrepreneurial roots and be scrappier, be faster, ship things really quickly, and sort of make really rapid progress. And I think what you're seeing over the last couple of years, culminating in Gemini, the Gemini series, which we're very happy with. Gemini 3 is, as you mentioned, our latest version, has sort of put us back at, near the top of, the top of the leaderboards where we feel we belong.
And you feel like you can stay there?
I feel like we can stay there, of course, yeah.
Amid all this competition, there's obviously a lot of talk about bubbles in AI.
Yes.
Particularly around valuations of certain companies, companies raising astronomical sums of money, the tech giants spending hundreds of billions on infrastructure, and companies out there, quite frankly, raising large sums of money with very little product or even very little profitability, if any. And so where do you think we are right now in terms of this kind of bubble discussion? Do you think we're in a financial bubble when it comes to AI industry?
I think it's not a binary thing, this bubble discussion. I think some parts of the industry might be in a bubble. To me, that's what it looks like, and others probably not. Fundamentally, AI is going to be the most transformative technology ever invented. So there's that part that underpins everything. So in the end, it's a bit like the internet bubble. In the end, the internet was critical, and there were some generational companies that were created during that time, right? So I think, that's sort of almost inevitable. There'll be over-exuberance once everyone realizes how transformative a specific technology is. And then there'll be probably a reckoning, and then the things that are real will survive and flourish. Where it seems to me is, maybe like in the private markets where there's sort of seed rounds at tens of billions of dollars, where basically there's just almost nothing there yet. And that seems a little bit unsustainable over the long run. As far as I'm concerned, I don't really worry about bubbles. From my point of view is sort of leading Google DeepMind. I've got to make sure that whichever way it goes, whether it continues to go all rosy and exponential like it is now, or there's a bubble, there's some kind of bubble bursting, that we're in the right position to win either way and to take advantage of that either way. And I think we've got a good position given Google's underlying business and how AI fits with that to benefit whichever way it goes from here.
I guess some of your biggest competitors are the ones who have managed to raise huge sums of money in the private markets at this point. So do you feel confident that even if there is some sort of correction at some point, that you'll be able to weather it out, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the whole point of Google's balance sheet and also all the incredible products that and surfaces that we have. I think it's dozens of multi-billion user products, and AI kind of naturally fits into all of those products, whether it's email, workspace, or new things like the Gemini app.
Yeah. You mentioned dynamics at play as well. We talked competition. The other one is geopolitics, which you mentioned as well. When huge discussions around China, of course, and this kind of competition battle between China and the US. But there was a point where people were discounting the ability of China and its companies to come up with strong AI models and technologies. But actually, we saw with kind of what DeepSeek did. It kind of brought a bit of shock to the world, but actually more than that, some of the big tech companies like Alibaba are coming up with some very competitive open source models. So China's not out this game, right?
Not at all. And actually, I think they are closer to the US US and West frontier models than maybe we thought 1 or 2 years ago. Maybe they're only a matter of months behind at this point. The interesting thing is, and they have from very capable teams, of course, like the DeepSeek team and Alibaba you mentioned. And the question is can they innovate something new beyond the frontier? So I think they've shown they can catch up, and be very close to the frontier and catch up very quickly. But can they actually innovate something new, like a new Transformers, that gets beyond the frontier? I don't think that's been shown yet.
Is that going to be, in your view, difficult because of restrictions on access to technology, like leading edge chips, for example?
No, I think it's more a mentality issue. So I think it's something that at least the leading frontier labs in the West have nurtured, I can say for ourselves. You can think of DeepMind as a bit like try to be a modern day Bell Labs and encourage innovation and exploratory innovation, not just scaling out what's known and today. And of course, that's already very difficult because you need world-class engineering already to be able to do that, and China definitely have that. The question is the scientific innovation part. That's a lot harder to invent something is about 100 times harder than it is to copy it. So the question, that's the next frontier really is, and I haven't seen evidence of that yet, but it's very difficult.
So one of the most striking parts of that part of the conversation for me, Steve, was around China. I used to live in China for just over 3 years, report out of China for CNBC, covering the tech sector there. And there was this growing view recently that actually China's so far behind the US when it comes to AI for multiple reasons. One of those is that, it may not be able to get its hands on the most advanced chips, so its industry could fall behind. One view is that it's just not innovating and it doesn't have the capital the way US companies do. But actually, what was really interesting from Demis is he said that he believes Chinese AI models are just months behind where the US is. So actually not far behind. And remember when last year we had DeepSeek really shock the world and markets, it showed, I think, China is in the game. And since then, whilst DeepSeek hasn't quite made the waves it did when it first kind of came out, Alibaba, one of the world's biggest, or one of China's biggest tech companies, has been a leader there. It's developed some really interesting models, which if you look at the open source community, such as on a site called Hugging Face, you see Alibaba's models are amongst some of the most popular. Experts who I've spoken to in the space say they're amongst some of the most advanced in the world. So you are seeing there. And one of the things I can tell you just from living and working out there is Chinese companies move fast, they have the expertise, and they can innovate. So you can't discount them out of this kind of AI race. But also take Demis's point that he said, whilst the Chinese companies are sort of catching up and are very much in this race, one thing they haven't proven is their abilities to kind of make these big breakthroughs. So, I thought that was a really interesting and nuanced view. I guess the other part here, Steve, is something you picked up on, is Demis's comments on bubbles and AI bubbles.
Yeah, and by the way, let's go back to what he said first about the months thing. DeepSeek a year ago, it wasn't just about the fact that China can do it and make a really good large language model or a chatbot. It was also the idea that they did it without the most powerful Nvidia chips that kind of rattled the markets as well. And that's what we're seeing here in the United States now, Arjun, is trying to limit China's ability to get those Nvidia chips. There's all this talk about maybe they'll get those H200 chips, which aren't the best chips, but they're better probably than what China has access to. And then you get into the whole smuggling thing. But to Demis's point, if they really are months behind without full access to these chips, that kind of questions NVIDIA's prominence and dominance in the chip space as well. But yes, what you said about the bubble is also super interesting too, because you asked him about that. Are we in a bubble? What do you think? All this sort of things. And he basically said, we're Google. We're rich. It doesn't matter. We have the money. We have the free cash flow to spend this. Our balance sheet is our superpower. If for some reason we need to rein back the spending, we can do it and we'll be fine. But guess who can't do that? That's OpenAI and Anthropic, the other two leaders. XAI, we can throw them in here too. Their whole thing is they have to raise money indefinitely in order to get to the point where they can finally show some revenue and revenue growth to sustain themselves without continuous fundraising. If things start to dry up, OpenAI and Anthropic are at extreme risk. Google, Microsoft, Meta, they have the cash flow to move on to another project. Meta's already done it with the metaverse. These companies can pivot very easily because they had these big, high margin businesses already.
Demis, there's a lot of people, I guess, forget how much of Google's AI capabilities come out from DeepMind and yourself and your teams. How do you work with Google? There's a lot of fascination around that. Does Sundar Pichai call you up one day and say, hey, Demis, we need this thing, or we have this idea for Gemini or for some other AI product. Can you build it? How's that relationship?
Yeah, so the last 3 years we've combined everything together into Google DeepMind, this one entity that all the AI research at Google goes on in, and it's a kind of combination of Google Research, Google Brain, and DeepMind. And I run that group, and it's like the engine room of Google. You should think of it like that. So all the AI technologies is done by this group, by our group, and then it's diffused across all of these incredible products right across Google. And the last couple of years, we've been building that backbone. So not just the models, but also almost re-architecting the entire infrastructure of Google so that it can, these things can ship incredibly quickly. These models, it's almost sim ship to all the main surfaces. So, when we release a new Gemini model, it's there the next day or the same day in search. And that's been going really well. I would say we really got into our groove with the 2.5 Gemini models. And for the last sort of year, that's been coming really a smooth process now. And I think you'll see that more over the next 12 months. And so, we think of ourselves and describe ourselves sort of as the engine room for that. And, Sundar and I pretty much talk every day about strategic things and where should the technology go and what does the wider Google need. And then, we adjust the roadmaps and the plans, on a daily basis, whilst keeping in mind the long-term goals of, getting to AGI first, fast and safely.
So we should expect more of the ability to come up with new things, new AI tools, and that be shipped across the Google portfolio, etc., because of that kind of change you've made in that relationship.
Yes, that's right. So it's an incredibly tight sort of iteration loop, and we're all on the same tech stack and so on.
A lot of what you're building is going into Google products, but I know kind of covering companies like Samsung, you help companies like Samsung to build out some of the AI tools within their smartphones, for example, and that kind of thing as well.
Well, look, we work with a lot of partners, as you mentioned. We're very proud of the fact that our technology is selected by those partners because they see how capable it is. And actually, when it comes to Samsung and other devices, I think there's really interesting. I'm very interested in the idea of edge compute and faster versions of these models working on these edge devices, be those phones, but also new devices like glasses that we're working on, and with partners like Warby Parker, and the idea of smart glasses. And I think Google's worked on smart glasses for a long time, as you know, but I think the day finally we have the killer app, I would say, for it, which is this idea of a universal assistant and sort of helping you in your everyday life. And I think all the big device players are going to be interested in that type of technology.
Demis, we've only got a few minutes left, but I do want to ask a little bit about. I was a brand new tech reporter when Google bought DeepMind 2014. I think it was a £400 million deal back then. So many people didn't know what you did. And why is Google buying this British company? What's going on here? Do you ever look back to that and think, oh, maybe we should have stayed independent at all?
Yeah.
Or are you happy with how things have turned out?
Well, look, I knew, it's funny. So the head of search at the time, Alan Eustace, he was sort of in charge with Larry. Larry was sponsoring Larry Page was sponsoring the deal as he was CEO at the time. But Alan Eustace was delegated the head of search to kind of close the deal. And I did tell Alan that this would be the most important acquisition Google ever made, which is quite something given they've there's YouTube and AdWords and other things that they previously acquired. But I kind of knew how important this was going to be, and also how good a fit it was with Google's mission, which is organize the world's information. And AI is a very natural fit to that, and organizing and understanding information. I mean, what better tool than AI for that? So I kind of knew that would be a natural fit. And we sort of knew that this, maybe it's now worth, I don't know, 100x, 1000x of what we sold it for. But the thing is, I wanted to get back to the science at the time and push forward the research, which was still very nascent back in 2014. And fair play to Google is they were one of the few companies in the world, I think, that could recognize, and specifically Larry at the time, how important this technology was going to be, what it could become, and what we see it for it today. And I don't think we could have done the great work we did with AlphaGo and AlphaFold and all the science we've done, if we hadn't had their backing and the amount of compute that they could bring to play. So I don't have any regrets at all.
So tech CEOs, AI CEOs, they're new rock stars of the world. I've seen Jensen Huang here in Europe, and the CEO of Nvidia, being followed around by everyone as well. Jensen, I think, said recently that you and him talk. He had great things to say about Nano Banana, the new image generation too, as well. What do you guys discuss?
Oh, I mean, Jensen's great. He's an incredible pioneer. Also, somebody, I admire him for sticking to his vision for 20, 30 years now. In fact, I first started using GPUs in the 90s for gaming, of course, for writing graphics engines and physics engines. So it's funny that it's come full circle to me that my early gaming days, even the hardware that was pushed then is now useful for AI, ironically. But yeah, we talk about he's very interested in science and AI for science. And actually, AlphaFold was trained on GPUs. So he loves AlphaFold and the work that we're doing, in drug discovery. So we mostly talk about AI for science.
I know a lot of the data centers are built on Nvidia systems, but I know Google also has its tensor processing units, TPU chips. Is there any kind of competitive friendliness there?
Yeah, well, look, we're lucky we have our own. We love our TPUs. We generally use them internally for training our best models. And actually, we found there's a big demand for that from the elite AI teams who are trying to build large models or serve very large AI models. They're specifically built for that. So TPUs are they're a little bit more special case than GPUs. You can think of GPUs as being more general. So, maybe we would use a GPU when we're trying to explore some new architecture like AlphaFold was, or some new application. But then when we're trying to scale to the maximum things we know, then custom silicon can be a lot more efficient. So we're lucky we have both. We get to use both here at Google and DeepMind.
Great. Demis, just looking to the future, you're obviously so focused on science and the potential for AI to create new drug breakthroughs, discover new diseases, lots of potential things there. You've also got isomorphic labs, of course, as well. Where are we on this path to your vision of AI unlocking all of these kind of breakthroughs in the world of science?
Well, look, I always point to AlphaFold as probably the best example so far of AI applied to science. I'm very proud of that project. And, we solved a 50-year grand challenge in science of protein folding, how the structure of 3D structure of proteins. And over 3 million researchers around the world are using it in their critical work. So I can't imagine a more transformative sort of technology. And what I would love is to be able to point to a dozen AlphaFolds and, each of them revolutionizing their area of science or mathematics. And I think we're well on the way to that. And we're working on half a dozen projects like that in material science, in physics, in maths, in weather prediction. And I think that the next 10 years, if AI goes well and progresses well, and we use it in the right way, it could usher in a new golden age of scientific discovery.
What do you think are going to be the big things in AI in 2026? Any big breakthroughs, any big progresses that you think will happen?
Agentic systems that are able to do things more autonomously are going to start becoming reliable enough to be useful. I think we're going to see some really interesting things in robotics in the next 12 to 18 months. We're working really hard on some very ambitious projects with Gemini robotics. And then finally, maybe, AI assistants on devices. I think we're going to start seeing them really useful in the real world. And then maybe the thing I'm most excited about is advancing world models further, making them more efficient so they can actually be used maybe for planning in our general models.
Great. Demis, I'm going to take that last answer as a sort of teaser trailer for the next time you and I get to catch up, hopefully at some point this year. Thank you so much for joining me, Demis.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, just in that final part of the conversation, I thought what was interesting is the relationship between kind of the DeepMind entity and the broader Google business. And there was a part where Demis was saying he speaks to Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google or Alphabet, every day, and how sort of more integrated they've become. And I think if I'm thinking about that in this AI race, what that signals to me is that Google has clearly figured out how to become speedy at getting AI products to market. But also, you got to think about all these Google products, right? Whether it's Chrome, whether it's Gmail, whatever it might be, they are wanting whatever Google AI is being developed to spread all across those products. That gives them an absolutely mammoth user base to kind of almost instantly tap into with some of these products. And I've said this for a while now. I think one of Google's biggest strengths really is that when you think about the Android operating system and how large it is, 70% odd market share globally, that is a huge amount of people and devices where Google AI could be effectively installed on. and used quickly. So they're in a good position in terms of going to market, I think, and clearly this relationship between DeepMind and the broader Google business is going to be integral for Google to sustain any success over the longer run here.
Yeah, and on the Android front alone, I mean, Samsung, the biggest manufacturer of Android phones, they're already putting Gemini is their main chatbot. Gemini is their main AI. I was a little surprised Samsung didn't try to build their own, which like they have in the past. But no, they've completely gone all in on Gemini. They're partnering with Google on those the new mixed reality headset that they have. There are some upcoming glasses that they're working on in partnership also with companies like Warby Parker to design them. So yeah, Samsung has like really adopted this, and that is a huge platform for Gemini. Just the Samsung angle of it, just that huge market share they already have is great. And then let's talk about Apple. Gemini is actually going to be the engine that powers this new version of Siri we're expecting in just a couple months' time. He did talk about his excitement to see Gemini kind of spread on more devices. So I think it's a really smart move by Apple to kind of realize it can't build this on its own and honestly do what Samsung is doing and say, okay, let's just integrate this proven technology. We already have a great relationship with Google. And this is honestly a different kind of Google that I've seen for so many years, where you had so many different groups kind of working on the same thing. I mean, before this big reorg and Demis got all that control over all of AI, there were multiple groups within Google working on artificial intelligence, kind of bumping against each other. And Sundar Pichai was really smart, saying, this is a huge moment. We got to reorganize everything. He folded everything under Demis Hassabis and put it into DeepMind. And that's where we are now. And it's really paid off in 2025 in a big way with Gemini 3.
Yeah, and that consumer space really is getting more and more intense when it comes to the AI side of things, particularly as you mentioned before when you were talking about some of the talk about bubbles, these competitors like OpenAI. Google has big balance sheet, strong cash flow, and it has a huge user base of users, and it continues to innovate. And I think this really does, given the kind of that reorg and this kind of speed you're seeing now from Google, I think this is gonna add a lot of competitive pressure onto OpenAI, particularly on the consumer side in 2026. So it's all up for grabs.
Yeah, and we're going to see a lot of different stuff, I anticipate, from OpenAI this year. They're going to throw all the spaghetti at the wall they can to see what sticks, because they've put enormous pressure on themselves to generate enormous amounts of revenue in order to fulfill all of these promises they made about, capital expenditure build out of these big data centers with Oracle and all these sorts of things like that. It cannot happen, all these committed spending they have, unless they productize it better and more effectively. But like to your point, we're seeing this with Meta, by the way. Meta has a huge opportunity to leverage its user base, and it hasn't figured out how to do that in the way Google has. So right now, Google feels like they're kind of on top of things.
Well, look, part 2 of this mini-series on DeepMind is going to be out next week, and we're speaking to Laila Ibrahim, who is the COO over at DeepMind. So catch that. And if you've got any comments or thoughts about this episode, please reach out to us. You can reach us pretty much everywhere, I think. You're on multiple social media platforms. I'm a blue sky guy. Yeah. We're all over the place.
No Instagram. I quit Instagram 7.5 years ago, and I do not regret it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
No more doom scrolling. Love it.
No more doom scrolling for this guy.
Thank you all for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.